All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our show, Environmental Coffee House. I welcome you, Antonio. I did the show last night. I hope most of you got to see it. I think some of you did. It's great to see all of you here. Um, we have a lot to go over, so I'm going to tell everybody hi and thanks for anybody that's moderating for being here, members, all of it. So I want to go through this because we're following up today. And Richard Medhurst, I talked about who he was. He's a journalist. He's a good journalist. What he wrote about fits our channel. And it's almost like, is the chaos becoming the objective? In at least with the United States, because you step back from all the bullshit, the headlines, the press conferences, the social media, everybody's all mad and fighting and all the manufactured stuff that we see all the time, the distractions like the UFO crap going on. But do we have stability? I mean, we don't have peace. We have none of it. And then we do have chaos, and it's like a permanent crisis. We're always escalating something. I talked about it last night with Richard's piece about his assertion why we are, at least why the United States, the empire, is doing what they're doing. Fits fossil fuels. You look through it, and it's like, okay, everything is fragmented, everything's exhausted. We're all so tired, everything's so unstable. But it's really the fossil fuel industry behind a lot of this, which is Richard's contention to keep the hegemony of the United States afloat, to keep our people around the United States, around the country, beholden to our energy policies, that we are the United States, the empire is the fossil fuel center of the world. Meanwhile, climate policy is becoming a gutted. So Tony and I were going to pull apart all this geopolitical. Well, he's really good. It's his turn. The geopolitical ramifications of what Richard presented, and we're not doing anything but talking about uh, this declining empire of the United States, which is grasping at straws to remain the energy capital and have hegemony, strongman politics, all of the stuff that's going into it. It's not conspiracy. It's really happening. And I know Tony's got a lot to say about it. So, Tony, I do have two clips. And I just
Sure.
want you to talk first, and then I'm going to play the first clip of Richard, so it gives people an idea of that might not have been here last night of what Richard is writing about and discussing. Hi.
Well, first and foremost, happy Mother's Day.
Oh yeah, I am a mother of kitty cats and Dawn, my spawn named
uh,
Dawn.
and happy
Yeah.
Mother's Day to the mothers out there.
Yeah, I
Yeah, so
didn't say that.
today's show, today's show is a pretty heavy show. It's a very controversial show, but I think it will also be very informative. What Richard has to talk about in terms of American hegemony really
Hegemony.
goes into the theme.
Yeah.
Yes, it really goes into the same theme that we've talked about many times on this channel. And it really helped put together the puzzle pieces for people who didn't have a total view of why it's been so difficult to achieve effective global climate policy and domestic climate policy here in the United States. Um, well, first, I think just to contextualize Richard's view, is that it's not particularly new. I think what Richard does a good job with doing is explaining how the policy focus has shifted over time. And we're going to highlight a lot of that in this discussion as well. But it's important for people to understand when we use this term new world order or global order, that's not to be conspiratorial, is to simply talk about who are the commanders of the day. And
I
what
like that.
happened,
Commanders of the day. Wow. Love it.
so what happens, our story really began in the middle of the last century at the end of the Second World War. What happens is the United States becomes, first of all, the sole economic power in the West, and it becomes one of two of the major military and social economic powers in the world, of course, the Soviet Union being that opposing power. Well, this allowed the United States to shape the world in its own image. We had the Marshall Plan for Europe, and we had the rebuilding of Japan and its integration into the trilateral community. And this is also South Korea as well, the Philippines. So you start to see the formulation of the American grand strategy, right? The United States, its allies are many of which share oceans together, coastlines, in geopolitically strategic areas around the world. And by the 1950s, it becomes abundantly clear that the world is increasingly going to need energy security. The US empire is going to need energy security. The British are transitioning out of the imperial phase, being the top commanders of global policy, and the United States is transitioning in. But one of the joint features of their decline and our rise actually brings us to Iran. So that's why it's really important to understand the history here, because the things that are happening today have deep roots in things that have happened decades ago. So by the time that we get to 1953, the British and the Americans orchestrate civil unrest, riots, murders, and the regime overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh, the first democratically elected prime minister of Iran. The reason why Mohammad Mossadegh is ousted by the Americans and by the British is because during his premiership, he attempted to nationalize at the time, which was the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Today, we know them as British Petroleum. Okay? And so when he attempted to do this, this threatened part of the American emerging grand strategy for energy dominance. And so, therefore, Mohammad Mossadegh had to be ousted and replaced with the Shah, a US friendly client. We'll see this pattern throughout this discussion as well. This enabled Iran to really become docile and mostly non-threatening to American hegemony in the Middle East, for which it will set its primary stage for its global strategy in terms of energy domination for what would be the next 40 to 50 years. So this, of course, would backfire and lead to the crisis in 79 with the hostages. But you'll start to see that at this point in time, by 79, the United States is already trying to deal with the crisis from Saudi Arabia, the energy shocks of 73, the rise of OPEC. The United States has to work very geopolitically, strategically, to maintain its control over global energy markets. At the same time, we see the end of the Bretton Woods system, that the United States is no longer going to be attached to bullion, but now it's shifting to energy security. This is the beginning of the petrodollar. And this is essentially a world order that slips into place that is connected to the world order that emerges after the Second World War, but now it is actually distinctly different, right? The United States has a policing role in order to guarantee its dollar reserves. And so this is also spreading dollarization. More countries are going to have to use the US dollar. More countries are going to have to use the US dollar in reserves. And so this is a plan that enriches the United States, but the trade-off is the United States needs to then invest in its military in order to guarantee open sea lanes, make sure the pipelines are protected, the necessary global energy infrastructure is there, and the United States is its military, is its security force. And so this is the sort of deal that the United States had really conceived and constructed in the post 1970s world, right on up through the fall of the Soviet Union, for which sped up this United States acquisition of the global energy logistics chain. So this has been something that's been part of American policy for a very long time. And the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the post 9/11 wars, work into this because it gives the United States direct military assets on the ground in the Middle East in terms of bases, in terms of regime control, and also the decapitation of anyone who might stand in the United States way, i.e.,
Yeah.
Saddam Hussein.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Remember that mess.
And so you see that this is not just something, although most of the show we are going to focus on how the policy has shifted and changed under the Trump administration. It is very important historically to understand that there are deep roots in the current grand strategy that's being pursued by the United States. There are some very interesting particularities and uniqueness about the way the strategy is being pursued now. And I would say is actually much, much more dangerous, much more reckless
Mm-hmm.
than anything that we've ever
Of
seen
course.
in the past, and certainly is a sign of America's declining political hegemony. And in the
Hegemony.
absence of that political authority, the United States is increasing its military prowess. It's becoming more militarily aggressive, even against its own allies.
Absolutely. Why don't we start with the first clip? I've got two clips of Richard to get everybody ready, and then I will. It's really your discussion. I did mine last night, my first part one. I mean, I went through, but not the same as you, obviously.
Yeah.
We are never the same, and that's why we're so good together because we do cover. Well, you've got a lot of geopolitical knowledge, so let me set this up, and we will play this one first.
The war in
Okay.
Iran is much larger than anyone seems to grasp. True, the United States are being humiliated on the battlefield by Iran, losing not just their F-35s and radars, but their military prestige. But in the background, the United States have quietly been carrying out an armed robbery of the world's oil and gas supply. In the last 3 months alone, the US have hit Russian tankers, refineries, crippled China's oil supply, captured the world's largest oil fields, and kidnapped and assassinated 2 heads of state. We are witnessing the transition of the United States from an empire into a pirate state. In the last 90 days alone, the United States proceeded to target all 3 of those lifelines with increasing escalation. First, the United States deployed a fleet to the Caribbean under the pretext of fighting narcotics. They then kidnapped President Maduro and seized Venezuela's oil, the largest oil fields in the world.
Between Venezuela and us, we have 62% of the world's oil.
80% of Venezuela's oil exports used to go to China. This accounted for 4% of China's oil imports, specifically the heavy crude that China's teapot refineries require in order to make the diesel that is used for China's high-tech industries. Russia provides 17% of China's total oil imports. While some of it is piped, most of it reaches China by sea. This includes the heavy medium Urals blend that China's teapot refineries also run on. Despite the extensive pipe network on land, most of this is shipped via Russia's western ports in the Baltic Sea. The US knew that China would immediately look to Russia to replace that oil. So they moved that same fleet to the North Atlantic in order to cut them off.
Okay, first. So that I showed last night, but I want you to go. And good morning to all of you that have joined the chat from, I don't know, there's a new Brandon. Good morning. Good morning. Okay.
Good morning and happy Mother's Day. At least for those of you who are in the United States. I don't know how international this day is. But yeah, absolutely. So, what was informative there is that, again, Richard does a good job in talking about how things have shifted over the decade in terms of American focus as a response to the realities on the ground. In the 1970s, China was not that formidable of a political, economic, military force in the world, and nor was its energy requirements, especially in comparison to today. By the end of the 80s, the early 90s, the Russian Empire, the USSR collapses into economic distress and ruin. The Venezuelans are going through an economic crisis. And so the United States, in this moment in the 1990s, in the early 2000s, is really has the stage to itself, okay? It is the sole superpower in the world. It is a unipolar moment.
Yeah.
This is the peak of Pax Americana, the peak of our empire in the 1990s. It also is a very nostalgic time for a lot of Americans too, including myself. But why? Because this is when the United States would solidify the most control and have the most hegemony over the world, okay? And from this moment, you're going to get people like Francis Fukuyama talking about the end of history, that we have come to the ultimate and final form of government liberal democracy as exemplified by the United States. History continues though, and we wake up to 9/11 on September 11, 2001. Commercial liners hitting the trade centers in the United States at the heart of our empire. Really a shock to imperial citizens around the United States and around the world. And this is the first time that really the American people have to see the backlash to American policy in the form of the attacks, the terrorist attacks on New York that would lead us into the Middle East. Now, that's important before I get to what Richard directly said, because what we're starting to see, particularly with Venezuela, particularly with Russia, and starting in the Middle East, is that there are these whack-a-mole moments as America is losing its hegemony. And so one of the first whack-a-mole moments is, of course, Iraq and Afghanistan. Another whack-a-mole moment is Libya and Syria. Another whack-a-mole moment is Somalia. Another whack-a-mole moment is the Gaza. Another whack-a-mole moment is Venezuela. Okay, and of course Russia with the Ukraine, and China, which, remember, during the Biden administration, and it's important to understand the continuity here, there was a quote-unquote pivot to China
Yeah.
in terms of Middle Eastern policy focus, because they can't take on China the same way they can take on Venezuela, or the same way that they can take on the Russians, right? With Venezuela, it was always possible either through sanctions, which the Obama administration pursued, or it was always possible through, black ops operations like President Trump had pursued. These type of hostile ventures were always possible in Venezuela, and you just need the right president to act on them. And of course, Donald Trump did. But through the American policy with Russia, the way that we were containing the Russians was through proxy war and aggression and expansion of NATO. So that's how the Americans were dealing with the Russians. But it was really difficult to contain the Chinese. The post-war policy of containment through South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, and Taiwan was failing because of the Silk and Belt Road initiative that the Chinese had employed. And the Chinese were becoming, through our own trade negotiations, through Nixon's opening up China, much more economically vital. The vitality of their economy was exploding and continues to explode even today, now matching and rivaling even the United
Oh, hell
States
yeah.
in terms of productivity. Um, and so the old strategy and containment terms of China was clearly beginning to fail, not only politically, diplomatically, in terms of trade, all of this, and now even the question of militarily. Um, so
Yellow one.
the United States only has a couple, as a declining empire moves up its so-called proverbial sleeve, right? We're losing the diplomatic arm. The ability for the United States to step in and diplomatically negotiate relations is obviously on the severe decline and really has been since its peak in the 1990s, starting with the climate negotiations themselves, where the United States was actually the lead aggravating nation in challenging the 2 degrees threshold, even at the time.
Aggravating? You said
Yeah,
aggravating. Yeah.
yes, aggravating.
Yeah.
So even back then, you see the United States' ability to negotiate really declining in terms of global diplomacy. But in the absence of political and diplomatic power, the United States, of course, still does have a very formidable military force, and it's able to project that force over the world, in large part due to the fact that it was already the global energy policeman. Um, and so, with this infrastructure of over 1,000 bases across the world, with its allies intricately playing part of its security roles in the Middle East and in the Far East, wherever it might be, in NATO, across Europe, um, that's really the sort of access the United States has had as a global empire. There's not really been an empire. There's never been an empire like the United States before. The British were close, but it is really true in terms of our territories, in terms of our bases, in terms of our culture, in terms of our alliances, in terms of our hold on the rest of the world. There's never been a country like the United States. There's never been an empire like this.
250 years this year. Oh boy.
And so these other countries, though, represent acute threats to the United States hegemony. Um, but it's not just Russia, it's not just China, which of course they do, but even our quote unquote allies can represent threats to our hegemony as well. Because if you think about this from a realist point of view, all countries are trying to achieve localized regional supremacy. But the closer they get to these
Oh.
gains, they want to gain greater supremacies. And so the problem here is that Saudi Arabia is actually Saudi Arabia first. The GCC countries are GCC
Of
countries
course.
first. And so over time, the creation of things like OPEC, the creation of a super regional, the euro dollar for the European continent, for the Eurozone, the EU itself, all of these institutions have different ways of threatening the U.S. grand strategy and its global hegemony. And so the United States has taken a diplomatic and political approach to dealing with a lot of these crises, and occasionally it would take military approach. But now under the Trump administration, under a lot of the guys, Project 2025
Yeah.
engineers, they take a much, much more military aggressive approach, even toward their own allies. And so it's not just Venezuela, it's not just Russia, which all, and notice what's been very interesting. the energy infrastructure in Venezuela has been
Mm-hmm.
captured by the
Yeah,
Americans.
sure has.
The energy infrastructure in Russia has been attacked by the Ukrainians, the American allies. And the Americans and the Israelis have attacked the Iranian infrastructure. And then, of course, the Americans knew, I'm not trying to be conspiratorial, but of course, the Americans knew that the Iranians had plans to attack the GCC
Of
oil energy
course.
infrastructure.
I talked
And
about that
so
last night. And so, because Richard laid it out, it was like an open and shut case. The Americans knew that. Take out those energy structures, and America gets to sell to the world.
So lo and behold, so and all the while, remember, because I want people to understand this is not just unique to Donald Trump, but remember
Oh.
one of the big things during the Obama administration was that we were the Saudi Arabia of natural gas, LNG, and we had built out a fleet
Yeah.
LNG terminals across this country. So this is a policy that continues to stretch. And so we always wanted our European allies to get off of Russian gas and buy American. But that's why under even the Biden administration, Nord Stream, we cannot have Nord Stream. Nord Stream was bombed. And
Yeah.
so
Mm-hmm.
that shows you that it's not just the Republicans who are willing to use military
Oh
aggression
God.
to achieve their aims or black operations to do so, but under Trump we're seeing a new phenomenon. While there's almost no diplomacy that's being used, no trade negotiations being used, it seems to just be a weaponization of trade policy.
Yep.
And in the absence of a weaponized trade policy, you have a legitimately weaponized military policy. And what this is doing is making the United States the only buyer, or the only
Seller.
supplier, excuse me. Yes, the only
Pirates.
supplier.
Pirates.
And if the United States is the only supplier, that means its corporations will obviously, as a byproduct of this, do phenomenally well. But it's more important than that. That means that all of the power that has been diffused by these different NGOs, international institutions, supranational institutions like EU, the pressures from NATO, the rise of China, the return of the Russian economy as an oil economy, as an energy economy, as a black gold economy, the Venezuelans, all of this
Mm-hmm.
is, the GDC participation, OPEC, all of this gets recentered and refocused back to the United States if its infrastructure is critically taken offline. And that's exactly what's happened.
I know. That's
That's
exactly what I mean, Richard's
uh,
piece was brilliant in that analysis. It just struck me. I do have the second clip. If you want to do that, maybe we
well, we
should.
certainly can. I just want to keep my
Oh,
explain a little
absolutely.
bit longer. So that certainly happened that all the major alternative energy suppliers are at the same time, incidentally, and again, I don't want to be conspiratorial, but incidentally being
Go
taken
for it.
off.
I mean, everything is a conspiracy, like Brett always says. Obsolete Optics, or at least changed his name. He said everything is a conspiracy, and when you think about it, it really is. It all starts out as a conspiracy, or whatever.
Well, and so, I will tell people we just even heard the American president, Donald Trump, come on, the airwaves, not just this week, and said that we could stomach $200 a
Yeah.
barrel oil. And I just thought, in the equation of that, it's almost $8 to $9 a gas on average across the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So that means elsewhere in the world, my goodness, I can imagine, particularly the Eastern and Asian markets. So yes, this is a situation where the United States wants to refocus all the power that's been diffused over the last 30 years back to the United States. And it wasn't able to do this through diplomacy. Right now, the United States, because of the crisis in Gaza, has lost a lot of its reputation, a lot
Yep.
of its standing. Although it itself has not been pursued legally, right? There aren't any arrest warrants for any American administrative officials, even though they have armed the genocide in Gaza. They participated in mandating the blockade by having their military forces there ready to protect the Israelis if anyone were to defy their illegal blockade of the Gaza
Right.
Strip. The Americans themselves have issued lethal threats against the international courts. So it's already been true that the United States has really lost a lot of its standing in terms of international humanitarian law, international norms. But in the absence of that, the United States can dismantle those institutions and we become a might makes right global society again, where the United States is the premier superpower in terms of its military, but also in terms of its control over access to energy. Which
Yeah.
these are the two weapons that the United States right now are dual using is its control over global energy supply and its military prowess. Now, what's interesting about what happened in Iran, though, which I mean, this is almost comical how much of a hold this puts in the United States plan, is that Iran only spends $10 billion a year on its military, which again we now spend. We're going to 1.5 trillion, as I understand.
Uh-huh. It's a nightmare. A friggin' nightmare.
So they don't even spend 1% on their military, and they were able to stop the Americans from achieving nearly all of their military objectives, and that's been absolutely phenomenal in a way that's been shocking, right? Because the Iranians don't have nearly the sort of technological sophistication, nor do they have the same amount of explosive power as the Americans. So there's a huge asymmetry between the Iranians and the Americans. And yet, the Americans have not been able to effectively change the Iranian regime. The Americans have not been able to effectively
Nope.
denuclearize the Iranians. The Americans have not been able to cut off Iranian strike capacity from their drones or their traditional missiles. And nor have the Americans been able to
Yeah.
reopen up the straits of Hormuz. And so this has been absolutely an incredible demonstration that even though the United States has overwhelming military might, it doesn't necessarily have even still the ability to achieve its stated objectives. But here, we don't have just one or two stated objectives not being met. We have a suite of stated objectives that cannot be met, although the Americans are really, really trying up into the point of talking about and discussing the use of tactical nuclear weaponry. So this shows a huge flaw or chink in the American armor. That if countries are at the point where they find themselves in an existential fight with the United States, and they have really looked at how the United States is engaged around the world and developed asymmetrical military strategic plans against the United States, it really is possible to stop the giant, at least from achieving its objectives. Um,
Okay.
and here's the last thing I'll say on that. And that's why we've
No.
seen from the Chinese that the Chinese have now passed legislation to ignore U.S. sanctions when it comes to this oil issue in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why they have done this now is because they're realizing actually the United States doesn't have as much political power as it is projecting itself to have. And also, there's a huge kink in its military power. the United States has had to pull a lot of its military assets out of the Far East and deploy
Mm-hmm.
them closer to the Middle East. Now, this has also severely degraded a lot of the political and military infrastructure from the previous grand strategies the United States has pursued in the Far East in terms of Chinese containment. So essentially, what the administration has done, because it has
Right.
fumbled due to hubris in the Middle East, has opened up a huge hole in its containment armor of the Chinese. Now, how the Chinese decide to get out will be up to them in Xi. That will be their own internal domestic policy, how they respond to that. But now the option is there in a way that it has not been for a very long time.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, Donald Trump is going to China. And I'm wondering how safe is that? And what is the goal? What do you think his goal is to go there? I think it's just pomp and circumstance and he wants a parade there for him.
Well, it's not so much about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a showman. He's a reality show. And when it comes to a show like The Apprentice or what have you, it's not really about what you see on television. It's really about the production going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So the real question is,
Ugh.
why is the American administration going to China? Donald Trump, of course, is unfortunately a horrific face, and he's quite bombastic and out of control, so that doesn't look good. And he has a lot, even in his figurehead role, that he can do to damage relationships. So it's actually a really dangerous thing to have him go anywhere. But
Yeah,
anyhow,
it is. Even to
but
Let him. Maybe he should go to Mar-a-Lago and just stay there.
but nonetheless, since he is the president, he'll be leading this delegation, the American delegation here, to China. But what's interesting is the reason why they're doing this is because the United States knows it really, really cannot have a direct military confrontation with the Chinese. The Chinese are a super serious culture.
Mm-hmm.
They're very intelligent, they're very strategic, and now they're very rich. But one thing the Chinese have issued to let the Americans know exactly how, because this is supposed to be their century, remember. The Chinese are supposed to outpace the Americans in terms of economic prowess. They are already diplomatically taking over a lot of places the United States have found difficult to pursue in its grand strategies, like the interior of Africa and around the African continent into South America, and of course the Chinese spear itself. But the Chinese are able to do this because of the Silk Road Belt Initiative and other adjacent initiatives they pursued. And so the Americans are attempting a sort of last stand political diplomacy with the Chinese,
Ah.
okay? Because they really can't afford a military confrontation. And they also don't have an outlet right now to have a Cold War style proxy war with the Chinese, right? The Chinese aren't at war with a potential American ally that the United States can funnel weapons through to degrade the Chinese state. And so, one option that the United States has is economic, which it already attempted through the trade war, and that went horrifically terrible for the Americans with the tariffs. So the other option the United States has is its declining political standing. It's going to try to engage in its weakening diplomacy. But that's very unlikely to work because the Chinese realize the hand that they've just now been dealt. The Chinese not expended any of their military arsenal, and they've recently just had a military parade showing us that they have very sophisticated military technology, and it's fully loaded, so to
Yeah.
speak.
So did Russia. Russia did too. But interestingly enough, they did not have their equipment there because it's all out there on the front lines. They had the marches, they had all of that, but they did not have their equipment there. And I know Putin was worried about Ukraine droning them.
And so, and notice this is also why the Chinese realize that they have to push for alternative energy technologies because they realize that the United States is a country, at least used to be, that would speak in the language of international legalism, but pursue these military grand strategies, violating international laws and norms. And it could do so in a way that other countries simply just could not have the
Right.
access to do without facing a lot of international backlash like the Russians have. So that is also changing because the United States has been so militarily aggressive, okay? And that is creating more of an international sentimental space for the Chinese and other countries that are able to also be more militarily aggressive, okay? I don't think the Chinese necessarily will be, but even the tension of military aggression can change the way that political outcomes are made. So I fear that um, the the potential danger of this, though, of Trump himself going, is he's bombastic and he says ridiculous things. And I hope the Chinese have strong stomachs because there's no doubt in my mind he will certainly try. He will not try. He may just be himself and offend them.
Of
Um,
course he will offend them. He offends everyone.
it's, and so I hope that uh, that is mitigated to whatever extent because the Chinese do see, and I think that, they're going to take aggressive action toward Taiwan and this opening that has been created by the Americans shifting military assets in such a way that hasn't happened in the post-war era away from the Far East. If they take Taiwan, they will not have just an opening; they would have a permanent now opening to the rest of the world in a way that the American grand strategy of containment, I think you would have to recognize would be a total failure. But containment is also failing because of the Trump policy in terms of the tariffs and in terms
Oh,
of immigration.
yeah.
The dog walking of the South Koreans at the Hyundai plan was horrifically offensive to the South Koreans, who are a very distinguished peoples and a very distinguished culture, and caused protests at the American embassy in South Korea. Okay, again, something that we really haven't seen in a long time. But also, the Japanese have been offended by the American administration because of its tariff policy toward the Japanese. Um, these actions have prompted both the Japanese and the South Koreans to send delegations to China to reorient grand strategic trade policy. So that's already a deafening blow to the so-called containment policy the United States has been pursuing of the Chinese, because now Japan and South Korea have really good cause to reorient their societies, their economies around China as opposed to the United States. But again, this energy move really challenges that. Of course, the South Koreans and the Chinese and the Japanese have been hit hard by the energy crisis that's now ensuing because of what's happening in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
The world is increasingly realizing that it's very vulnerable to American grand strategy, particularly when the Americans become militarily aggressive. And they do so in ways that they know very well will damage the economies of their of what I don't know if we can, the way that we're treating these countries, I don't know if we can call them allies, but in the previous administrations we would have still called them
We
allies throughout.
have no more allies except for Israel. And that is one contention Richard makes. He said, so many people are saying, "Oh, Israel controls Trump, the United States." They might have something in, on him from the Epstein deal and all, but he makes a contention that, oh no, they need the United States and we actually control Israel, but we know everything they're doing and we condone it.
Well, yeah. So the relationship with Israel, a lot of it has to do with, the way that people see this has a lot to do, unfortunately, with conspiracy and anti-Semitism. But to see it more clearly is that, of course, the United States is the ultimate card holder. However, the Israelis do have a lot of political influence over the United States as well. But in terms of who's the
Well,
actual
money,
master,
the
who's the
donors.
actual master, it
Yeah.
is the United States. Now, the reason why it's difficult for us to discern, remember, the Israelis threatened to use nuclear weapons against the United States. Um, the Israelis have very similar on the surface geopolitical aims that align with the United States. Okay. And so that's why it looks like there's a lot of influence from the Israelis there, because from a 1,000-foot view, some of the perspectives look very, very similar. But as you zoom in, you can see Israelis on those aligned tasks. The Israelis can have sway to move more in the Israeli direction than in the American direction. But the Americans, ultimately, their grand strategy goes well beyond whatever the Israelis do in the Gaza Strip, whatever the Israelis do in Lebanon, whatever the Israelis do in the West Bank, or even part of Iran. In part, now this is what's really crucial here, is that you can see that one or two things have happened with why the Trump administration has attacked Iran. The Israeli influence is clearly there, but the Israeli influence is not the definite. How do we know this? Because, of course, previous American administrations, both Democrat and Republican, told the Israelis no. So, in part, the American administration had to assume that this could fit in, or this was already optional within the American grand strategy in the first place. It was just one of those lesser options that seemed more problematic. But perhaps now the Israelis have convinced the Americans that actually, if we pursue this, it's still within. And in fact, it is, as you can clearly see, at least in terms of this shifted American grand strategy, because it did enable the Americans to get the GCC countries pretty much out of the picture. Now these countries, the sort of economic energy, the sort of economic power that they had has really been dislocated. In terms of their global soft power influence, because they're the vacation spots for all of the billion, all of that facade has crumbled as well. And so a lot of their ability to diffuse U.S. power has been diffused itself. Okay. And when
Okay.
power is diffused, it goes back to the United States.
You know,
Okay.
oh, also,
Go ahead.
the other presidents didn't have a Jared Kushner. They didn't have a Steve Witkoff. They didn't have all these, as big of the donor class. They didn't have a Larry Ellison buying all the media. They didn't have what has perverted now the United States political culture. And we're not going to go down that road right now, but Trump does have that. And we are clearly seeing it. Clearly.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do want to state that in the decline of our empire, of course, this has been the most thugged out. This has been the most
Yeah.
mafia, the most gangster
Don
of the
Corleone Trump.
American administrations. I mean, we literally kidnapped a head of state
Yeah.
and charged him in. I mean, so that's completely Sopranos. So I do want to acknowledge that there is a difference.
Yeah, there is.
In the way the Americans are conducting themselves under the Trump administration. We really haven't seen the Americans conduct themselves like this in a long time. And even with what's happened with the genocide in the Gaza Strip, talking about building shiny hotels and plazas over the bodies, you really haven't seen language like that. Or even calling for the Holocaust of 90 million Iranians overnight. So I do want to acknowledge, of course,
Okay.
um, you know, the Trump administration is outsized. It is not something that we've seen with previous American administrations, even though there's been a lot of violence, a lot of corruption with previous American administrations. We've not seen anything like what we're now
Nothing.
seeing out of the Trump administration. It's a
Nothing.
complete and utter disregard for any sense of international norms, laws, human rights, what have you. This administration doesn't even carry the pretense that it cares about engaging in international laws or anything
Nope.
like that. It doesn't need to justify its first strike. It doesn't need to justify its preemptive military action. It doesn't need to justify threatening the lives of 90 million people. Um,
It's
this
disgusting.
this administration is simply beyond anything that really the sort of legalistic structural system that was conceived in the post-war of courts, of tribunals, of councils and different offices. That's not sort of the world that the Trump administration is engaged in. So this is a very different side of the American empire, and it's sort of the most aggressive side. It's
Hmm.
sort of the most belligerent side of the American empire, where we've even openly threatened to invade Canada and Greenland.
Well,
We
that's
have to.
strategic. And as Richard points out in his article, those are all because of the fossil fuel industry and access. It's all related. He's Let's play the second clip.
Yes, let's go
Okay.
ahead and play.
Let me set that up because the second clip I think is
The
quite
US are
good
now operating.
also. Well, wait a minute. Do I have the right clip? Okay. Hang on. Hang on.
The US are now operating as a pirate state. They needn't even enter the Strait of Hormuz and can simply lie in wait near Diego Garcia or across the Indian Ocean to ambush commercial vessels at will. Ultimately, pricing cargo in UN achieves nothing if the cargo keeps getting sunk by an irrational actor. For the time being, this means that all three strategic suppliers of Chinese oil are either out of action, under attack, or threatened by the United States. This is especially critical because the type of crude oil that China normally received from Iran, Russia, and Venezuela was a mix of heavy and medium blends. China's teapot refineries are designed with this kind of oil in mind, as they're able to break down the heavy, thick sludge and turn it into the diesel that powers China's high-tech industries. Russian and Iranian oil are chemically different from Venezuelan crude and easier to refine, but China receives them at such a discount that it actually makes it worth their while to refine them using the teapots. While China can recover in the long term and their energy consumption is diverse, solar and coal alone can't power their industrial base to its absolute potential. Even with massive reserves, these cannot compare in the long run with the impact of having a pirate state attack their three most valued energy partners in the span of 90 days.
Okay, so you had discussed China, and this went a little further about the strategic goals of the US here, and that China, with coal and renewables, simply is not going to be able to keep up with their manufacturing without LNG, without fossil fuels.
And that's absolutely true. Like, as I say, this is the last. There are two main weapons the United States has here. The first is its military. The second is now its control over access to global energy. Um, and so this is one of the tools that it's using to weaponize against the Chinese, as containment has clearly failed. And containment will likely continue to fail but as it does so, we'll have this threat over the Chinese, and the Americans know the Chinese don't have the coal capacity, and nor could they ever have the renewable capacity to meet their energy needs. And China is very much still a growing country. It has pulled over 400 million people out of poverty, but it still has hundreds. It still has hundreds of millions more to go. But also, the Chinese are expanding in terms of helping other countries develop their infrastructure as
Mm-hmm.
well. And the Chinese want to sell their renewable energy technology to these countries
Sure, they are.
as a way of shifting the global energy market toward it using next generation energy as opposed to fossil fuels. Um, Now you can see that there's some benefit, obviously, in terms of climate for that to happen. Um, but ultimately, I want people to understand, with this being the environmental coffee house, this has been the invisible actor behind the curtains the whole time. This is why there was never going to be an energy transition. Look at what our country is doing, fighting like hell.
Hell against it. Oh,
Yeah,
everything. No
this has
renewables.
always
Canceling
been.
contracts. Mm.
This is always, even with, that's why the Obama administration, the Biden administration, that's why they're so begrudgingly moving so slow. That's why the Democrats move so slow on energy transition. And the energy transition that they're doing, it really is threatening American hegemony around the world, because American hegemony centers on a fossil fuel international system. Dollarization, militarization, trade, finance, all of that's based off of the American dominance over the fossil fuel energy supply. And so transitioning away from that is a way of destabilizing American, diffusing American global power. Um, and so that was always the trade-off, and Democrats have always knew that. That's why now the Trump administration is not playing this game. That's the way that's how the Republicans in the Trump administration see it. They say, we're not playing this game. We're not going to negotiate with the world that we're going to do a slow transition away from us being the global power. And we're not doing that. That's what renewables would do, is they would diffuse American power. So the Republicans say, we're not interested in that. We're going to keep as much of a global power as possible centered on the United States. And the way to do that is to make sure that we're the sole supplier of energy.
Yep.
And the energy we got is LNG, liquefied natural gas,
Mm-hmm.
crude oil, what have you. And what we don't have, we'll take.
But it's
which
why
is
Richard's
which is
piece was
the
so
piracy.
brilliant.
That's what I say.
Yeah.
So the piracy is so important there,
Yeah.
because whatever we don't have, we'll take, is really the name of the game of the Trump administration. And that's why you see, looking down what's happened to Cuba, as Richard talks about, is the deprivation of energy resources used as a way to force regime change upon the Cubans. And this is a sort of policy where we'll say, we'll starve your population unless you do what we want. We'll bomb your population. Look at the Iranians, or look at the Gazans. We'll bomb your population if you don't do what we
The
want.
Palestinians had no power. They've been in an open air prison for decades. They had no power.
Well,
This
it's
is
not that the Palestinians have power or not. They're in the way. Because remember,
sure
the Israelis, and I will
disgusting.
say this on the Israeli part, the Israelis did not want to genocide the Gazans. They wanted to ethnically cleanse them. So if there was a way that they could have just got them out of there and nobody would die, I'm sure they would have opted for that.
I don't
Um,
know, but that's another show.
but what's happened is that in their attempt to ethnically cleanse the Gaza Strip, um, they have created genocide of the Palestinians, and we're likely to continue to see that crisis go, well, very much as it has, unabated. And not only has the crisis gone unabated in the Gaza Strip, now over 1 million Lebanese in the
Yeah.
south have been affected by the IDF operation. So Israel's able to expand in this project of Greater Israel. Um, and this is okay for the United States because it destabilizes all of these countries that are direct foes to the United States, directly challenge the United States, directly don't engage in negotiation or trade policy with the United States, into the hands of a country that does. And so that can play well into, and that's the way that kind of Israel advertises itself as an outpost of Western civilization.
Huh.
What it really
Okay.
means is an
They're
outpost of
not.
America. What they really mean is an outpost of American hegemony, American supremacy, American imperialism.
American
Um,
ugliness. Except that
but
we don't give birthday cakes yet to our husbands with a noose on them, like Ben Gavir. I'm
Ben Gvir.
sorry. I can go. I'm not doing this
And
today.
Bill, Ben Gavir, of course, does not represent. I do want to just say that. Of course, he doesn't represent. A lot of Israelis really, really despise Ben
Sure.
Gavir
You just don't
and
hear enough
understand him.
about that.
Well, of course we don't, because just like we don't hear enough about the Americans that despise our own administration.
Sure.
These voices. I mean, look at what's happened on the college campuses when the students try to stand up against the administration, and actually both administrations, during the Biden administration and during the Trump administration.
Oh yeah, now we have NSPM 7. We are if you do it, you are a domestic terrorist. If you
It,
say Antifa, you are a domestic terrorist. But that's happening that's one of the things that happened to Richard. He was arrested under the UK terrorism 2020 law for saying the truth as a journalist. That's
yeah.
one of his contentions.
Well, and this is again the lawlessness that is ensuing the world as the American administration continues to proceed. Um, so ultimately, I think as we start getting into the end phase of the show here, um, people should take away that I don't evil empire. I like Star Wars. Um, it really is. I mean, look at what's happening. What's happening to our empire? Um, it's so devastating to think, as Americans, our country is such a violent, such a hostile, such a selfish. Um,
But it started that way. We started the same way as Israel is doing now. We started with a a colonialist project. See, I don't have a lot of sympathy for any of it. And as I've
well,
studied and learned and read, I've become very literate in a lot of things. I don't have any empathy or care for what has happened.
what
Maybe
I will
that's
say
maybe
though,
I've become radicalized, but I'm happy I have.
what I will say is one thing that stood out to me about the data point here is that as we're starting to see different energy suppliers go offline,
Hmm.
one of the energy suppliers, LNG, went offline. We're going to be told for the next several, maybe 8 weeks, is Australia. They were hit by a typhoon.
We have an Australian here, and we're going to do questions and answers.
Well, yeah, I would like to know a little bit more about that. But as we start to see, and this is the part that kind of always we knew had to happen, right? I've been talking
Hmm.
about the aging consequences for a very long time. I've been talking about how as the climate crisis continues to get worse, countries are going to get more entrenched, they're going to become more militarized, and the conversation around reducing emissions will essentially disappear.
It's
Which
already disappearing. It's already disappearing. It's insanely disappearing. Even in my state, the governor, Kathy Hochul, she wants to go back on the climate plan, and Climate Defiance has been protesting her in Albany. They're arresting the protesters in, liberal New York. I mean, we're
yeah.
fucked.
Well,
Sorry.
well,
Okay.
this is also another problem because At the same time, because the United States is reorienting the global order directly around itself. And so, and we have to understand that this is how an organism is fighting to survive, because the Chinese really were going to reorient the world around
Yeah.
itself
Yeah.
through, and is actually
So
planning to cut out North America in its plan. It was going to isolate the United States through slow erosion of U.S. diplomatic and international trade policy. So it was a way of doing that through soft power. The United States is violently responding to a lot of that, uh, and unfortunately, the United States, I think, also recognized that even in the long run, if we had presidents like President Barack Obama the whole way through the end of the century, he could never be skilled enough. He could never be talented enough. He could never write enough agreements. That's why the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that was a major key in American diplomatic power to try to reinforce the old grand strategy, and it
yeah,
failed.
it did fail, and I
Okay.
actually wrote about it back in the day. I didn't like that if you wanted to contest something, it was going to be a panel of three. I mean, there wasn't going to be a lot of diplomacy in that TPP. I didn't like it.
Yeah, well, that was a way of reorienting diplomatically again around the United States, around its transnational
Mm-hmm.
corporate consensus.
Right.
But that failed under the Obama
Uh huh.
administration, and so in the absence of the Americans being able to pass those sort of agreements, it has to rely again on those two weapons I've been mentioning. Its military
Okay.
force, and it's capturing, it's being the sole or the main supplier of global energy, or at least
Mm-hmm.
access to global energy. And so that's the options, that's the routes the United States has decided to take. And as we can see, in a lot of ways, it appears to be paying off, at least
Ugh.
in terms of actually functionally being able to do this. The United States corporations, as we talked about, have been doing phenomenally well. The Europeans are now firmly in the hands of the Americans. The destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, the continued degradation and destruction of the Russian oil fields, the destruction of the Insafar systems in Kuwait, or excuse me, Rastafah systems in Kuwait.
Mm-hmm.
We continue to see, so seeing the destruction of these global energy suppliers is really playing into the American hands in such a way that even though countries probably after had sustaining multiple threats from the American president, insults directly upon them, their peoples, they would move away from the United States. But now, in some ways, they're kind of locked hand to fist. They're handcuffed to the United States. Certainly, this is going to be the story of Europe over the next 10 to 15 years. And really, that's another comment I wanted to make. This is really only about a 10 to 20-year strategy. Countries that
Because we're
have
going to
been,
be extinct. No. Okay. Sorry.
and I say that's a good projection. So that's assuming that the world doesn't become increasingly militarized and combat zones continue to spread. Now, if that does and
Eesh.
infrastructure continues to be taken offline, that's a completely different pathway than what I'm thinking about. What I'm saying, if behavior, international behaviors begin to normalize and move away from combat, and countries are able to repair their infrastructures, then this would be about a 10 to 20-year move. But there'll be contracts and negotiations around energy, but those things can kind of be eroded if other energy infrastructures are developed elsewhere. But if the United States is literally the main supplier and you can't get from anywhere else, then you're kind of locked in. So this is about a
Yeah.
10 to 20-year run if countries are able to repair and rebuild their infrastructures.
Right.
Um, However, if uh, global international relations continues to deteriorate, this could radically change geopolitical politics um,
Mm,
for for at least the next
long
generation or
time.
so.
All right, we're going to do questions.
Sure.
There
Sure.
are lots of comments and questions. Tommy has a lot of stuff, but
Sure.
I want to make I want to show. Well, first of all, I'm going to show. Ask them again after the Super El Nino gets done with the planet. Yes, yes, absolutely, because that is coming. All right, I wanted to show that because actually Elliot had Elliot Jacobson, who's been our guest professor on Substack, had a graph today that he posted that actually does show the sea surface temperatures insane, and we're going to have to absolutely,
I will have to watch that.
yeah, we'll
And
do a
that's another
show.
part. Probably I was remiss to not talk about, but absolutely, it is kind of incredible that all this is going on at the same time because the president is
Yes.
administration. His administration is very aware that there's a global climate crisis going on. The United States military, as I stated before, and I think I've said this on our show so many times, that our response to the global climate crisis was not going to be a build out of renewables, but it was going to be a militarized,
Yep. And here we
militarized.
are.
And that's what we're doing.
God.
And we're upping the military expenditure 1.5 trillion. Oh, 1.5 trillion, 1.5 degrees be it broke. So there you go. So maybe by the time that we get to $2 trillion in military spending, we'll be 2 degrees
Yeah.
Celsius.
Two. Oh, hon, I think we're gonna exceed that. At least Elliot does. All right, let me it's happening. It's happening. It's going to happen. All right, let's look at the Australian comment from where are you? I had it. I just had it from Michelle, I believe. Michelle. Here we go. Hi, Michelle. In Australia, we have two oil refineries. One got burned down. Apparently, heaps around the world don't think it's an accident. So yeah, they had the weather catastrophe, but people are saying, "Gee, it's so." And we did see a lot of this around the world. We've seen these energy infrastructures burned down in the last 6 months. So
Well,
that's what an
I don't
Australian is
know. Yeah, I
saying.
don't know what to say. I don't have any more information on
Right.
that, but it's quite
We'll,
unfortunate
we'll
and certainly does play into the U.S. position here.
we'll find somebody from Australia to interview because it would be phenomenal. And I think I have the person. Okay, well, thank you for that, Michelle. Okay, Tommy. He's got a ton of stuff. And first, I want to make this. This is from old Jack Wolf. The 90s only seemed good because we had just lived through the 70s and the 80s. I can certainly comment, but I'm not going to. But that was a good comment because the turbulence that we experienced in those decades. Okay. Antonio, how do you see this playing out? Do you think the U.S. will be able to maintain its position of relative hegemony in 2050 or beyond? Now, you had just talked about the timing, but that was one of the first questions.
So today we live in 2026. 2050 is about 25 years out, 24 years out now. So what would likely continue to happen is the Chinese will continue to try to develop robust their renewables. But now we're talking about significant changes in the Earth's global climate. I, my understanding is by 2050, we very well could, in the absence of geoengineering, Um, in the absence of geoengineering, we could face 2 to 3 degrees Celsius global average temperature.
Uh-huh.
Um, you know, I would say that at that level of warming, um, it would be very hard to predict exactly how countries would respond
Right.
to the myriad of crises they would have to be facing.
And predicting is a very difficult thing. And every time people make predictions, it can start a shit show. We don't do
What I
that here.
can say is that what this ends up doing is it will force countries to have, and this has always been part of the moderate view, even coming from the World Energy Outlook from the IAEA, the International Energy Agency, going back for over a decade, is that the energy mix through 2050 was always going to encompass fossil fuels. And the share of fossil fuels was actually going to go up, or it's not the share, the total, excuse me, not the share, the total amount of fossil fuels was going to go up, the share would go down, the percent would go down. Um, but here that might change the scenario. So this is going to be a high end, if you're still thinking about representative concentration pathways from the IPCC,
Hmm.
this would be a high end RCP 8.5 scenario where renewables do play an increasingly larger role in the global energy mix, but they never achieve dominance or parity with fossil fuels. The United States, it looks like we're going to just go in the complete opposite. We're going to get rid of our renewable
We're
energy
destroying
capacity.
everything. They have a data center planned in Utah that is bigger than, I think, what did they
Oh,
say, 20
I
something
totally
Walmarts?
forgot to mention I love that you just mentioned that. I totally forgot to mention that data centers, the type that we're building today, are not part of any of the or any of the climate analysis models. So we didn't foresee, because we were thinking over time countries will reach a parity, right? That they will continue to grow, but kind of at a slow, moderated rate. We're trying to decouple growth with energy. That was a big thing. But these data centers have such magnificent energy demand that that whole project is just completely illusory now. And so now energy demands are to double in the United States by 2050.
Well, I can tell everybody that I'm not getting a new anything, and if I'll have everything fall apart here. I have not had anything new. I am not partaking in all that shit, except
So
for the
energy
batteries. Batteries I
energy
have.
demand, and this is something that the models, we always knew that energy demand was going to go up in the developing countries because they were going to become increasingly more industrialized.
Yeah, I
We did
know.
not foresee a skyrocketing in energy demand
Mm-mm.
and emissions from already industrialized countries.
Right.
And now, I mean, we have to completely redo our models because countries will be demanding so much more energy per person than we had previously considered. So this is a huge human-induced feedback that we didn't
No,
foresee
2 years
just by
ago. We did, I mean, even
exactly.
2 years ago. I mean, I didn't even know much about AI. Shit, I had to learn about it, I'd say, in the last 6, 8 months. I didn't know anything. I didn't even know that I
and it
had
would
been sharing some AI until I was really chastised about it.
and it was one thing, and we saw this in our civilization, right? That in the 90s, in the 80s, in the 90s, we didn't foresee that energy demand would increase because everybody would get a smartphone, then they would get a iPad, then they're going to get a laptop, then
I
they're going to have
have
a
it.
flat screen TV. So we didn't see those like slow creeps in individual energy intensity and consumption. We didn't see that. Today, putting in a data center is such a magnificent increase upon those just slow
Yeah.
ways that the average person has been increasing their energy usage. Now, the per capita energy usage and intensity is going to explode. And countries are pursuing these data centers around the world with like effects. So we now need to
I feel.
recalculate two things.
Yeah.
Because before we assumed, even under some of the 8.5 RCP, I keep on talking IPC language,
Yes.
the relative concentration pathway 8.5 scenario, um, in those scenarios, we still assume that renewables would be a large share of the energy mix. Now we're seeing the United States acting so violently as to lock us into a larger share of fossil fuel energy mix. Um, so we're going to have to see how China and other countries try to balance that, because perhaps they will, because they're going to reduce their reliance on American energy some way. I mean, this is also going to make China dig deep into its coal cores. I mean, that will be, oh, geez. I mean, I don't know what will happen there, because the Chinese are going to need to meet their energy demands, and their population is demanding increasingly more
Yep.
energy. And so they're going to have to go back to turning back on a lot of those retired coal-fired power plants. I mean,
Ugh.
they're going to scrub
I
them, they're going
have
to make them cleaner,
so
but
I have so much. I don't know what words to use about this because I use, obviously, I have backup batteries. I have, solar panels I could put outside. I don't have permanent solar
well,
panels.
this is why
I I
I
ha-
well, this is well, Sandy. I hate to interrupt, but
no,
this is
whatever.
why I say it was so important that the world saw this moment and immediately began isolating the United. I begged on your last show. I begged the world that they needed to immediately move to isolate the United States politically,
Yeah.
culturally, economically, diplomatically. I called for the international arrest of our administrative officials. But in the absence of doing this, I mean, and now the United States has made it impossible,
Hmm.
right? Um, like I said, the United States is a very dangerous country. No other country in the world has ever sent an open letter threatening to use lethal force, since we can't use the K word, use lethal force against international court justices. We've never had a country name the families that they'll go after the families to. We've never had a country do that in a public
Well,
letter
in the
before.
public. Oh, in the private, these things have happened.
Well, in the
Yeah.
private, absolutely,
Yeah.
but that just shows you the level of indifference the United States is showing to, say, even
Depraved.
international. Because of course we've had countries behind closed doors make threats to people, but we've never had a country send an open letter to the courts and saying,
Right.
if you go after us legally,
Right.
we're not just going to sanction you. Of course, we're going to sanction you. We're going to use lethal force against you and your families.
Oh my God.
Um,
It makes me
so
feel like.
yeah, so that's the sort of, and again, this is a sentiment that was agreed upon by both Democrats and Republicans in the United States. It's actually it's laws on the books in the United States, legislation, the so-called Defense of Service Protection Members Act, or whatever it is. It was dubbed Invade the Hague Act. The United States has authorization to use lethal force against the international
I don't want to
courts.
start crying.
So, but well, I just want people to
Ooh.
understand that how serious of a situation we are all in. Not only as imperials ourselves, we are imperials. We are in the empire. We are part of the empire. I mean, really, I want Americans to think about this. This is all being done, even though you're not. It's not being done directly for you. It is actually being done for you. I mean, this is for your way of life, for your supremacy, for the ability for you to build these freaking suburban houses in the woods, and everything you see is because of the
Yeah.
fossil fuel powered world
Yeah.
dominance that America has created. And Trump, if you want to thank him, he's securing this way of life for you. because that will be the ultimate outcome. We'll continue to be able to sprawl out and have gas-powered cars and have data centers and do the
Nothing in the natural world. Nothing. Destroying the entire. Ask Lyle Lewis. I've had him on, what, 3 times now? Destroying the entire natural world in the United States. Everything is going. It's going. I don't know how we stop this.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, well, it is a very challenging thing, and it's really it's really hard to say now because even if we even if we do get someone in like a Bernie Sanders or an AOC, we have so damaged the global infrastructure for the United States to leverage its soft political power to move in the right direction. Who wants to ally with the United States? Who wants to get
Israel.
who wants to get in agreements with the United
Fucking Israel.
States? Who wants to do international agreements with the United States? Who want to do trade agreements with the United States? Who want to do weapon agreements with the United States? When we just saw over the last decade, the Obama administration engage internationally on the climate conferences with the COP, signing on to Paris in 2015, the Paris Accords. We saw the United States, the Obama administration, negotiate, what was dubbed the Obama nuclear Iranian deal. We've seen, at the same time, we saw the Trump administration come in immediately thereafter and completely reject and pull out of the Paris Accord, signaling to the world that the United States internally, its administrations don't even have enough respect for each other to behind the door we're not going to enforce it, but we're not going to pull out. We're just not going to enforce it. Or, we're not going to meet the objectives of it.
Of course not. They
That would
laugh
be
at
how
it.
Republican administrations would respond to international policies that Democrats would get in, is they would just be less compliant with them, but they wouldn't necessarily completely pull out, especially a treaty of this magnitude and of this importance. But here the United States does. Or pulling out of the Intermediate Continental Missiles Ballistic Missile Treaty. This is a very aggressive, very dangerous move that the United States under the Trump administration did. Or pulling out of the nuclear Iranian deal. This is showing that even if something is dangerous, even if something is immediately existential as nuclear annihilation, the United States could get in a deal with you and immediately get out. And if countries are going to see that it doesn't matter how dangerous, how serious the issue is, the United States could get in, get out. Or even with the Iranians, even in the middle of peace negotiations, in the middle of talks, you stall and start bombing and killing civilians in countries and start trying to regime change them in the middle of negotiations. So the United States has proved that you really ought not engage with them on any level unless you really, really, really have to. And when you do engage with the United States, it's clear that you also have to threaten them from the get-go. And that's exactly what the Chinese have done.
Yeah.
The Chinese has said that they are going to reach nuclear parity with the United States before they engage in grand strategy talks.
Humans are insane, Antonio. I'm sorry. Humanity is such a
it's a very logical move because the Americans are essentially saying we're ready to use it because of the way they threaten the Iranians. They're saying we don't care about nuclear taboo anymore. We'll use nuclear weapons. So the Chinese are saying, well, if the Americans are going to openly say they're going to use nuclear weapons against populations, then we're at least going to tell the Americans we stand ready with a nuclear arsenal to respond. And the Chinese have now moved from 600 between 300 to 600 nuclear weapons to an aim of 1,600 nuclear weapons. And these nuclear weapons will be clustered nuclear weapons. They'll be smart nuclear weapons. They'll be hypersonic nuclear. They will be next generation nuclear weapon technology. And so we're really seeing, in terms of the sort of international peace that was able to be achieved at the end of the Second World War, with after in the Cold War, even denuclearization has completely failed. Countries are now not going to and even this is true even now with Iran. It's more likely that Iran will nuclearize in response to American hostility and Israeli hostility.
Right.
And this is also proving in the world that countries ought to now dedicate resources to nuclearization if they want to stop the United States from engaging in its much more aggressive and hostile version of grand strategy, where it can kidnap countries or start bombing schools and hospitals in countries and things of that nature. So we've completely moved away from the sort of liberal order that dominated international relations for the last 80 years. And we've really moved into a hyper-realist game theory mode of international relations, where countries really have dropped any sort of pretense of broader international humanitarian concerns. And now they're completely obsessed. We're moving into an era where countries are obsessed with these international, these national strategic plans where they dominate not only their own sphere, but the global order through grand strategy. So I think that's where I
No
do think
wonder why my back is fucked. It hurts all the time. I'm internalizing this in my spine probably, but I have ways to get around it.
what I will say though is that again, in the United States has realized though that this is going to be a lot. It's going to be a lot more difficult to achieve than it had previously thought, because the Iranians showed that they had the ability to devastate. Again, it wasn't just about stopping the Americans from achieving their objectives, which they did. It was also about the force the Iranians were able to project in their own region. The Iranians were able to continue to strike Israel even through the worst of the American and Israeli bombardment. The Iranians were able to strike Kuwait. They're able to strike the UAE. They're able to strike Saudi Arabia. And they were able to do this because they had developed reinforcement asymmetrical strategy that the United States simply wasn't prepared to deal with at scale. Now, this shows that countries could really, if we're going to move into this global game of constant war, where countries are fighting it out and there's very little political diplomacy, the United Nations falls apart. And that's actually what, again, in the age of consequences, we talk about as we move to the 2030s, we may actually witness the collapse of the United Nations.
Yeah, because we have the Board of Peace. Another corrupt piece of shit.
And really, the collapse of the United Nations will be pivotal, because if the United Nations collapses, what it means is, you had 8 billion people on this planet who are wearing, a lot of them wearing suits and ties, like really trying to make sure we don't just kill each other. The collapse of the United Nations means that project of pretending to be civilized is over. So if we lose the United Nations, that will show that international humanity doesn't really exist. We only exist as tribal nationalistic humanity. And that sort of world led to back-to-back world wars. So that will be, when you see the United Nations collapse, you should imagine that a very aggressive, hostile military wars are likely to ensue. Now, it is the 21st century, so things are going to look very different than the last century. but we're already starting to see a peak image of what parts of the world will likely look like: the Gaza Strip, and now increasingly southern Lebanon,
Lebanon, I
parts
know.
of
And
Iran.
my heart hurts for my daughter, for you, for everybody in our chat, that are decades younger. My fucking heart just hurts. I work on it. I cry and I breathe.
Well, the thing that the world will have to do, it the the only way out of this is to become completely independent
Yep.
of the fossil fuel energy system. Um,
No, that's gonna happen.
so the,
I mean, think about it,
the,
really.
but that's the only way that we can get out of this, and also continue to respond to the climate crisis. Uh, we have to reduce our dependency, because if we don't, we'll see that we can easily be trapped into these grand strategies that are centered around fossil fuel energy system. Um, so if we're able to decouple that, then we will not be captive to the commanders of the system. Um, but that is, in the absence, in lieu of that, we will always be prey to this sort of response. And that's why it was so important in the Obama administration that we really, really, really should have been going all out toward a transition.
Yeah, well,
And
shoulda, woulda, coulda.
American energy, soft power influence over the world should have been refocused on humanitarian efforts, showing the world that you can build relationships and partnerships with people by building schools, by building water infrastructure,
Yeah,
by building
hopium.
roads.
Beautiful
Well,
dream.
no, well, there was a vision
Yeah.
in the last century that making the world safe for democracy didn't just mean having a big military and taking out the bad guys.
Absolutely. I lived through it. I saw it and I hoped and worked for it.
But it is 2026 now, so reality is setting
Yep.
in.
Sure.
Um,
And my tears, I'm a tough broad. All right. I'm a tough old whatever you want to call me. And I've earned the right to say all those words. I have been in a lot of pain lately, and I internalize. But you know what? It does get overwhelming. We have these conversations. Usually, I can hold it in, and I'm really sorry, everybody. It's emotional. Think about where we are, and I'm only reacting to my emotions. Usually, like I said, I'm really tough. But today, we just got
well,
to a point where I'm not, and yeah, I got tears, and it hurts me.
and
Not for
and
me. I'm not thinking of me at all.
and Sandy, absolutely. I think, and that's why talking about Richard's work here was so important,
It
because
really important.
it really helps put together the puzzle piece.
Yeah.
We've not understood the depth of the derangement in American policy, what's wrong for our administration, but we really are addicted to fossil fuels in a way that has become lethal. Um, and Americans have a choice here as imperials, that we have to reject the consensus of our empire and demand change ourselves. And if we don't, the world is might temporarily fall into this financial trap, but they're going to be constantly looking for ways to become less dependent on the United States. And as they become
Yeah.
less dependent, and we lose all of those international humanitarian systems, those ways that we talk to each other without having big sticks, um, countries are going to start warring with each other. And I'm really afraid that, I mean, the Europeans, I mean, there's so much room now for military aggression and military buildup around the world. Um, it's very dangerous, the world that we're moving into. It's very dangerous. And at the same time, and I've used this phrase before, the world itself will be at war with us. So we will be at war with each other, and the world itself will be at war with us. Um, and that's a situation that didn't have to happen, and that's the real shame.
Yeah.
And it's the reason why it is because we were never brave enough not to pursue these grand strategies. We were never brave enough to pursue power through other means than oil and fossil fuel domination. We were never brave enough to tell the oil industry and its corporation that this can't be the model of our prosperity in the future. We never were able to do that. And because we were unable to do that, we're going to have to bomb people now. We're not able to do that, so we're going to, so now we're going to have to invade countries. We
Yeah.
weren't able to do that, so now we're going to have to end historic relationships and alliances. We're going to have to threaten our neighbors to the north in Canada and Greenland now. We're going to starve the people of Cuba now. So we, it is a terrible thing. And I hope that when the Democrats do come into power, if that's possible, the Supreme Court is incredible in the United States. I mean, every facet of our society it's absurd. But the Supreme Court striking down major provisions of the Voting Rights Act.
Where I live today, these fucking idiots are having a protest to pass the SAVE Act. They don't even understand it. And I was reading the little local paper on it, and nobody's counter protesting because nobody wants to give them what they want. These people don't even understand it. But because it's told, it's the SAVE Act, because they're racist, ugly, white supremacist, fascist loving assholes. And I'm probably demonetizing this. YouTube will probably demonetize this, although it's not monetized right now because I never do for a live show. Never will I do that to anybody. But it's like these people are clueless. But you see, the thing is, Tony, what's the percentage of United States citizens that are just as stupid as these fucking morons down the road from me protesting for the SAVE Act?
Well, something like 50 to 70 million.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it is terrible.
Sorry.
And for me, looking at the Supreme Court, looking at it, to me, and the Democrats just aren't the opposition party.
Oh God, no, Chuck Schumer. We want those UFO things. I mean, what an idiot.
So to me, it's it is a very dangerous time because even if the Democrats come into power, I see increasingly Obama's playing a bigger role in the background, which means that he's going to have a lot of influence over how the
liberals
party. That Hillary Clinton is being resurrected, and so this is the aggressive arm. People have to understand. Hillary Clinton and Obama represent the aggressive arm of the Democrats. That's their version of, in a way, that's their version of Trump. Okay? Obama expanded the post 9/11 wars to over 11 different combat zones. Hillary Clinton was talking about using nuclear weapons, not taking nuclear weapons off the table. And so these people are very, very
psychopaths too.
So the Democrats, they realize that we're moving into this more aggressive sphere, and so they're pulling out their guns. And so this is their guns. And so they need to make sure they maintain control of the Democratic Party, and that, in their view, the peaceniks, the weak Democrats like AOC and Sanders and Mamdani, those type of people don't take power. Because they don't understand the new position. Obama, Clinton, they may not like what Donald Trump did and how he did it, but they immediately accept this is now the status quo.
Right.
So that's where we're pivoting from.
Ugh.
Um, so that's the sort of Democrat Party that has a large potential of coming into power in November. And if that Democratic Party comes into power, it's going to do very little domestically to heal much of what Donald Trump has did, but the most absurd things. It will go for theater optics. So we might have,
Yep.
huge Senate hearings and things like that, but they'll be to no end. And maybe somebody will get arrested. That will be a shock in of itself. Somebody gets arrested. Maybe that will happen. But it will
I
mostly
do
be
that a lot.
theater. It will mostly be theater and for dramatic effect. The United States will continue to secure something like the Trump grand strategy, but without less hostile projection, in particular to our American allies. So we'll still reorient around American energy, or the United States being the main dominant global energy supplier and guarantor to global energy access through fossil fuels. We'll still continue to do that, but we'll do so more pleasantly, and we won't be threatening our allies. We won't
Right.
kidnap people.
I have to answer, Ernie. The bright side is outside. The bright side is rescuing animals. The bright side is a victory garden. The bright side is caring for your neighbors. The bright side is making choices for where you live and doing the positive things that you can, because the big picture is not bright, but you can make that difference. And collapse acceptance, because once you accept all of this, that it's happening, you can make those changes. And Ernie, I know where you live and it's a beautiful place. Those are the things that are the bright side, the things you
Well, you know
can
what? I have to.
change.
I sometimes I get so hard pressed. I'm just thinking this is a country. Again, we're imperial, so again, we have no idea. We've just bombed the hell out of the Gaza Strip, and people are asking what's the bright side.
I know.
I mean, I'm just thinking to myself, I'm hungry right now. I haven't eaten this morning. I'm hungry right now. I couldn't imagine
Being there.
being hungry, starving to death in a bombed out. I just,
I know.
so, I
I
just,
know.
it's hard to take a moment, but that's what it means to be from the empire. Can you leave me with something that's going to make me smile and be, be appreciative that the air conditioning's on for you. Like I said, however you want to think about what's happening
Ernie's
today.
Canadian, by the way, so he's luckier
Okay.
than we
Well,
are.
I guess buddy, the bright side is we have an
You're
invasion.
Canadian. Yeah.
That's the bright side. Okay.
Okay.
Bright side is we've not got that. We haven't invaded Canada. No, I'm not. Well, I guess I'm not kidding. That is also that is also good. We've not invaded
Right.
Canada. Um, but it is hard increasingly to talk about these things and think about, oh, well, what's the good side of this? Well, the good side of this is that the United States will maintain a good bit of global power for longer. The United States empire, your way of life, will be less affected in the way of either transitioning to renewables or losing reserve currency status, because also a lot of this has to do with dollarization. Um, the United States, one of the reasons why it's one of the most powerful countries in the world is because we're the reserve currency of the world
Right now.
through what we call dollarizations, that countries exchange in dollars. Um, but as we move away from dollarization, that could critically injure the United States economy, its ability to loan, its ability to handle economic crisis, its ability for Congress to expend money on domestic policy, so fiscal policy, you might say. So there's a lot of problems with de-dollarization, and the United States is increasingly facing de-dollarization from countries like the BRICS countries, Brazil,
Right.
Russia,
And
India.
that is why Richard wrote his piece, because it's almost like we are just hanging we're hanging on by the military might, by being a pirate country, which
Right.
is, we've
And
gone full circle.
so reorienting the energy supply around and back to the United States' dominance allows dollarization to continue and to grow. Because the United States can do kind of like how we're accusing Iran, oh, they're thugs for making their demands about the. Well, we can make our demands now. We can say, well, you got to dollarize if you want access to American energy. You got to dollarize if you want access to American, and that was part of
Yeah.
the deal is that we'll continue to protect your ships and your cargo of our military if you play along. So there's all this dollarization that is attached to the grand strategy as well. Um, so you have to keep that in mind here. And unfortunately, because the Trump administration has been so aggressive, it's really difficult to conceive that the Americans, even under the Democrats, can pivot completely away from this orientation. So this means that the Democrats, again, they're not going to pursue this full force at the same speed, but it's not going to be too dissimilar from what we saw with Biden, right? Biden, yeah, he got back into the Paris Accords, but lackluster. He didn't return back to the Obama nuclear deal. That was incredible.
Really, that was
Um,
incredible, wasn't it? It was incredible that they didn't resurrect the JCPOA. And I mean, he had his Inflation Reduction Act, which you talked about many times on this channel.
and that was a weakening down of Build Back Better. But like I say, because they're not going to go. See, Build Back Better would have been going exactly, very very staunchly in a different direction. They're not going to do that. And this time they're not even going to do a build. They're not going to do Inflation Reduction Act. That's going to be much much more watered down this time. If the sort of Obama-esque Democrat and
Ugh.
Obama really does want to put his finger back on the thumb because he also sees this as ability to rescue his legacy. Um, Biden, in a way, but Biden, because of his mental acuity, was on the decline. He had a lot of health issues.
Yeah.
He was misstepped. He was weak. Inflation was going up. The Americans, he wasn't handling the crisis and got so it was really looking bad for Obama. Okay. And of course, Trump immediately preceding Obama was a complete backlash, could be understood as a complete backlash and rejection of Obama's legacy. And so Biden Harris, more ideally, was supposed to repair the return to Obamaism. And that never happened. That never happened. And so Obama still has a lot of power. In fact, he's actually one of the strongest Democratic players now because Biden, even though he's the former president, the immediate last former president, his health has declined so much that he doesn't play the game anymore. Hillary Clinton also sees this as an opening as well. She clearly sees, look at these old men. I have much greater mental acuity than any of them. She may even potentially try to run again in 2028.
She's older, way older than me, for gosh sakes. We're trying to get rid of the fossils. Sorry.
So
I can say that
I just
too.
want people to understand as they're looking at the political agenda here, Hillary Clinton may actually try to run for president again. Okay? Now, Obama is furious
Can we
because
flush? Can we flush that?
before we flush that, we might need to flush this.
We have, oh no.
Obama is furious because so he would never be able to even pretend like that he was going to have a third term, whereas Trump is more than pretending.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
2028
so,
hats in the White House.
so Obama knows that it's not possible for him to even think about gearing up toward trying to, and I don't even know if he would want to do that really, but the fact that Donald Trump is trying to, means that Obama needs to actually be very, very active in his post presidency. So Obama's going to be hyper. If we thought Obama was political before, when he was calling the different Democratic presidential candidates, trying to get them to consolidate against Bernie Sanders, if we thought that Obama was active like that, he's going to be hyper active, involved in backstage politics in a way that we really haven't seen a president engage in. And then again, I think Hillary Clinton still has that opening and opportunity now, realizing, Americans are voting for old people, and they seem to be okay with that. And I
I'm not
definitely have
okay with
higher.
it.
And I will say, Hillary Clinton, I've just recently watched interviews of her. She is still her mental acuity is very high.
Oh, of course she's fine. It's not that's the issue.
Yeah. But anyway, so I could potentially see her as coming back in 2028 and really considering a run. She may not actually run back. I could see her considering a run, if not actually running. And now this would be devastating in terms of responding to the climate crisis, because of course they would not adequately respond to this crisis. But at least under the Democrats, I think there would be serious geoengineering plans in the works. That's the thing that kind of I think about the Republicans. I don't even know if the Republicans care enough to geoengineer. I don't know.
Well, a lot of people think they're that it's being done, which, I mean, under Trump, how could it be done? They call it a hoax.
Well, if
Like,
again,
ridiculous.
the problem with saying that geoengineering, we can end the show. We can end the show, but let me. The problem with saying
We've got questions still.
oh, okay. Well, it's 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
And it is Mother's Day.
Okay.
And I do have to see my mother and my
Oh,
grandmother.
that's lovely.
So let's take 2 questions more.
Okay. And we have to do a flush.
I'll try to answer them, and we do have to do a flush. So we got
All right.
lots of flush.
Well, I'm going to do the flush first. We
Okay.
have, for those of you that don't know, Environmental Coffee House has a flush of the day, and we pick something to flush, and I will get it set up, which I never am easy on this. Antonio, you pick the flush.
Oh, geez.
We'll just do 2 at a time.
Okay. We're going to flush the American Grand Strategy.
Okay. Let's flush that first, and then what's the second one, guys? Israel. Let's flush Israel first. Okay, let's go. Here we All right, there we had our Environmental Coffee House flush of the day. We flushed 2. We could have flushed all day long. We could have flushed everything. All right, guys, we're going to go through. There was a couple of, Rick had okay, what do you think of Rick? And hi, Rick. It's really great to see you. Permaculture.
Yes, thank you, Rick.
He's so wonderful. I love Rick. Trump will declare martial law, instill a military government, and suspend the election. That's how his actions make sense. Thoughts?
Well,
and Rick has a great channel, by the way.
Well, Rick, I don't think that's beyond the pale. I think that's certainly a host of options that's going to be available for the president. And I really think that we've already seen a lot of the mechanisms put in place that will make maybe not necessarily martial law, but something akin to that possible, and particularly through ICE. I think it's most likely going to be the force, Border Patrol and ICE. But we'll see, because we saw, I didn't think Bovino was going to get taken down, and he was. Kristi Noem, Caroline Leavitt. There's been switches up in the administration. So the administration is vulnerable. The administration is confused, but that doesn't mean the administration is not dangerous. So it is very well possible that if the administration feels like it's going to be threatened by the Democrats sufficiently, it might take extreme action. Well, I would.
They already are.
Well, I was about to say they have. let me
The
say it like
Supreme
this:
Court.
they will take even more extreme action. And like you said, and I was just about to mention, and the Supreme Court also is very favorable to the Trump administration too. It has almost complete acquiesce to the administration, and we will continue to see the Supreme Court will play a dynamic role in the sort of fascification,
Mm.
the rise of fascism in our country. The Supreme Court, which is very interesting, has no concern for, well, like the administration itself, it has no concern for these broader humanitarian questions, civil liberties and rights. It doesn't really have concern. It too is moving in a direction to consolidate power in the executive.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Unitary executive theory. We've got it.
so this is a we are moving. Again, I love Star Wars. We are moving away from a republic and into a first global empire. Um, and I will also remind people that the crisis in Star Wars in episode one started with a blockade, an illegal blockade of the
Oh
Naboo.
my God.
Um,
Oh my God.
so here we are.
Oh,
Um,
replicating movies.
well, what I tell people is Star Wars, and we'll go to our next question, but Star Wars really is a fantastical way of dealing with the trauma of the last century, the crisis of the First and Second World War. And
Yeah.
so it should be a total surprise that we see a lot of the same thematic resemblance in our own time.
Mm.
Um, but the republic itself is being weakened. Its robust institutions of science and technology, of civil service are being destroyed. Okay, and its population is being diluted with propaganda from old directions. And
Mm.
so, and this is all necessary to reorient the empire, or the what we talk about imperialism, but now we're really talking about empire, not just a democracy, but moving away from democracy into a real imperial status. That's what's happening in the United States. And this goes back to, philosophical thinkers like Thomas Hobbes, a Leviathan.
Mm.
And that's essentially the consensus here, is that America needs a Leviathan to rule, a supreme leader of sorts. And this is how the United States, at least under the Project 2025, is really geared toward refocusing itself away from its democratic institutions and into its most executive ones.
Or an eco-fascist. That's Sam's idea. Okay, let's. That's a totally different thing. I want to bring one of Tommy's up, and then I'm sorry, everybody, that we're not going to have time to get to. I didn't even want to do a 2-hour show. Antonio, how much time do you think this energy grab will buy the U.S. empire? Will China and Russia sit by and let this happen?
So, well, they're not letting it happen now. The Russians are sustaining horrific attacks upon their infrastructure, and the war in Ukraine really is problematic for the Russians. The Chinese are trying to maneuver out of this. As I told you, they've already passed legislation to ignore U.S. sanctions when it comes to the energy embargo, the oil embargo. So it's not that they're not doing anything, they're already in motion. This
Mm-hmm.
is why it's more likely that as international institutions break down, as trade agreements break down, as liberalism breaks down, these countries will become increasingly militarized. So in some sense, if you're trying to think about this in terms of model ensemble, if you have a model where countries don't militarize and don't respond through militarization, this would buy the United States approximately 10 to 20 more years of supremacy. It could buy the United States longer if they were to get in trade negotiations, locking countries in. But who's to say the countries would maintain those negotiations, particularly if they begin to militarize? What if countries begin to militarize right away? Well, we've already seen that's sort of what's happening. This may not buy the American empire much time at all, maybe just next 5-10 years. We have a lot of financial leverage over these countries because of their ties and their access to energy supplies, but then they're going to begin to question the United States military, because the United States military is what's going to be guaranteeing access or denying access. But if you can challenge the United States military, then you can force access to this system, and that will change the trajectory of American empire as well. One thing that's already changed the trajectory of American empire is the destruction of American military bases across the Middle East that are in range of Iranian ballistic missiles. So that was a strategic miscalculation by the Americans. And then also moving so many military assets out of the Far East and essentially allowing containment of China to collapse and fail. So it's not necessarily going to be a clean-cut win for the Americans at all. It is a huge gamble. And then also the United States has destroyed all of its soft power with its allies. This has not really been foreseen in global political strategy from the United States before. I don't think there's too many grand strategies, and you can actually go online and they literally publish their grand strategies, where the United States would be so hostile toward its own allies. So this is kind of new.
All right. Well, they're already starting to work on challenging the U.S. and its military.
Well, right.
Yeah.
The Canadians are engaged in urban warfare, strategic planning because of the Americans, right? We've already seen contingents of international force from the Scandinavian countries, from Western European countries, go to Greenland in defense of Greenland against the United States, many of which were even NATO countries. So everything has changed. Everything that we thought was true before 2020 about international relations is a veneer now. They got to keep the semblance of that, but really not even skin deep. The entire international system is in flux. It is in
What a show.
a state of hyper metamorphosis away from the Washington consensus of the post-war era. We are moving into a state of tripolarity where we're going to see power exist in Russia, but a gravitas of power, magnificent power exists in China. Israel will become a regional superpower. We will see the fall and decline, maybe the total collapse of the United Nations altogether.
Wow.
And then the United States will it really wants to subdue Canada and Greenland to become North America. So there's a greater America view as well. I don't know. It used to incorporate Mexico, but I'm not sure if they want to do that because of the white nationalist project.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Also pursuing internally.
Oof.
So it's really difficult to say, but as I've been warning over the last decade, we are likely to see countries continue to militarize, entrench, and international relations to break down.
Yeah, thank you. My next show, How to Take Care of Kittens. No. I just want to say really quick, I will have a show on Tuesday, and then I'm off next week. I will be probably doing something for my daughters because I will be with her for 3 days. She's having a little surgery. I'm going to take care of her. So I'm going to be the mom, even though she's a grown adult. So thank you, everyone. This has been a really intense show. What I want everyone to do is work on their collapse acceptance. I want everyone to get outside if you can and breathe wherever you are. I want everybody to try to decompress, because yes, this has been a heavy show. And I'm going to decompress. My back is getting better, and I'm goddamn going outside to touch grass barefoot. So, thank you all. We really love you. And I want to thank Richard Medhurst for writing the article that opened the door for us to take it even further, because that's the natural succession to what he did.
And I just want people to know, you know, I'm not trying to get people emotionally aroused here. I want to report the facts the best I understand them.
And you've got it.
You know, and this is a serious issue that we're all dealing with. You know, I'm 33 in September. You know, the way that we are going will now dominate the outcome of my life.
I know. And my
you know,
daughters too. And that's
So-
why I cry, not for me.
So I understand full well the implications of the things that I'm saying here. But we have to continue to fight against it. We have to
Nobody's saying not to.
we have to continue to call out the administration. We have to continue, and the administration is fighting against us because this is becoming an empire now. And because it's becoming an empire, it's going to pass laws that are going to call us terrorists. It's going to demonize and go after the freedom of speech. But we have more influence over our government than any other peoples on the planet. So it really is up to us. We know their plans,
Okay.
and we can foil them.
Thank you. See everybody Tuesday. Thank you. I love you, Tony. Go see your mom and grandma.
Thank you.